Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien here on the morning of Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023. Sitting in for Paul Harvey this morning. Stand by for the rest of the story. Well, today the rest of the story is about perfection, legacy, and divine intervention. This coming Saturday, it'll be 50 years when you had perfection, legacy, and divine intervention. This story, of course, is Secretariat and the Triple Crown. But now, here comes the rest of the story. Well, Americans, Paul Harvey, if he were alive today, would be glad to do this story. Everybody knows about Secretariat and the way he won the races in 1973, 50 years ago, and became the first horse to win the Triple Crown since Citation in 1948, 25 years. Lo and behold, it will take over 40 years for another horse in 2015, American Pharoah, to do the same thing. But American Pharoah and the horse after that, who's won in 2018, they're Triple Crown winners on their own right, but they don't hold a candle to Secretariat. And the rest of the story starts in 1968, when that little upstart farm in Virginia fell into deep financial problems because its owner, Mr. Charney, never knew how to pronounce that name right, was sick, and he went to the hospital, and he spent a lot of years in the hospital from 1968. He was even in the hospital till he passed away in 1973. His daughter took over, Mrs. Cherney, and she tried the best she could to keep it afloat. It was, wow, poor lady. Her daughter Katie can tell you that keeping that farm and that business afloat was, ooh, poor mom. Ugh. And she did. One of the things that came her way was in 1969 when she bought a little colt called River Ridge. Nothing ordinary, extraordinary about this colt. It's just something that she had to do. She did. And for the next 2 years, River Ridge was a good horse. I mean, he had a good 2-year campaign. I wouldn't say exciting by most standards, but it was good. So, in 1972, they decided as a 3-year-old to run him in the Kentucky Derby. The odds of River Ridge winning the Kentucky Derby, well, a little high. But he won some races prior to the Kentucky Derby. And first Saturday in May of 1972, River Ridge did the impossible and won the Kentucky Derby. Yet, he was to be in oblivion because remember, back in 1969, Majestic Prince had won the Kentucky Derby in the Preakness and failed miserably in the Belmont. 1971, Canyonero II did the same thing. And Mr. Eddie L. Carroll, who was the last guy to win with Citation in 1948, said in the telecast of the 1972 Kentucky Derby that nobody was going to win the Triple Crown. Well, River Ridge won the Triple Crown, but he had a horrible Preakness, and he was no factor in the Belmont. And therefore, at the end of the Belmont, again, Mr. Eddie Alcaro came back with his prediction that, as I told you so, that nobody is going to win here. Okay? And because of River Ridge winning the Kentucky Derby in 1972, Mrs. Cherney had bought this unknown colt for $2,500. His name was Secretariat. And as a 2-year-old, wow, he won everything in sight. He was just one guy. The only surviving team member of that famous race in 1973, the Belmont, and the Preakness, and the Kentucky Derby, is his rider, jockey Ron Turcotte, who's now 81 years old. And in recent interviews leading up to this week, he had said that it was a blessing to be on a horse. That's saying a lot about a horse, people, from a jockey. Ron Turcotte was not in the same category as Eddie Alcaro or Lafitte Pincay or Angel Oncar Jr., which were the top riders at the time. There, Lafitte Pincay is a countryman of mine, and he was a good American jockey. He won a lot of races. Angel Cordell Jr. was a Puerto Rican who was his archenemy, and during that time, they won their shares of Preaknesses and Belmonts and a few Kentucky Derbies, although both had a hard time at the Kentucky Derby. But they never won the Triple Crown. And of course, Eddie Alcaro would take swipes at those two anytime he could, because he had won 2 Triple Crowns back in his time. And what I say about legacy, perfection, and divine intervention, you see about the divine intervention, because if Mrs. Cherney hadn't bought River Ridge when she did, there's no way she could have afforded Secretariat, even though he was a cheap horse and nobody wanted him. Would Secretariats have won the Triple Crown? Well, that is up in the air, because, you know, it's an if. Whoever had bought him, would they trust him like they did? Would he get Ron Turcotte as a jockey? Who knows? That's the divine intervention part, people. How could Ron Turcotte rode Secretariat for all but 2 races? And he went over to the trainer who wasn't in the category of Dean Wayne Lucas or Bab Baffert, today's trainers that you know about. He was a known trainer, but he told him, "You're overworking Secretariat," and he had lost big time at the Wood Memorial. I mean, awful. He looked terrible. Therefore, he wasn't even in the top consideration for the Kentucky Derby. That's how bad he looked in the Wood Memorial. The problem was he was sick, and nobody knew it until Ron Turcotte talked to one of his friends and found out, oh, okay. So he went over there, checked, and yeah, he had a jaw problem that the bit was holding him back, and it got him sick. So he got antibiotics from his friend, And by the time the Kentucky Derby came around in May of 1973, Secretariat was back to being itself. The races that followed. You know the history. Secretariat won in 159 was the time he won the Kentucky Derby. Is this week's horses gonna match 159? The odds, I would say, are 99% against. Nobody has touched that record in 50 years. And what was surprising was the guy that did the races for CBS, the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness, and the Belmont, his name was Anderson. I forget what his first name was. But before he died, he said that those races were unique. That's something for a very renowned horse sportcaster to say. Because unlike other sportcasters that CBS, NBC, and ABC had during the time they had the Triple Crown races, he was strictly a horse guy. He wasn't like, they would put guys in like Frank Cosell or other guys to do these races. And that was very, to the sport of kings. That was a degradation to it. But yes, according to Mr. Anderson, those were 3 unique races. Because today, the records are held by Secretariat on all 3 races, especially the Belmont, where he smashed Galliant Man's record by 2.5 minutes and 31.5 lengths. So that is the legacy part, people. And the perfection part. He's held those records for 50 years. Are they going to fall? Well, probably eventually, yes. We may not be around for when they fall, but heck, Babe Ruth's record fell, Roger Maris's record fell, and Barry Bonds' record's going to fall too. Hopefully soon. But that's just because I got a biased opinion. But Secretariat's record, I would love it to see it another 50 years and go 100 years before somebody, if you have the Sport of Kings still there, because the Sport of Kings is on the way down. Will it last another 50 years? Who knows? It's lasted a long time. We can thank Mrs. Cherney for Secretariat, or Colonel Meriwether Lewis Clark for Churchill Downs. Without that, we wouldn't have any Triple Crowns. And who's Colonel Meriwether Lewis Clark? Well, if you know Meriwether Lewis and Clark, you know William and Clark. Well, he was the grandson of William Clark. He didn't have a good life, but at least he gave us Churchill Downs. That is the legacy part, Americans. Sitting in for Paul Harvey, this is your favorite alien. Good day.